Hi, welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thanks so much for joining me today. I wanted to do this video as a bit of a update or follow-up to a video I did several years ago on the first step in healing. And I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. One is the messages and comments that I've gotten from people about that video, and two, the increase in the number of people out there talking about healing and what it takes to heal. So the video that I did was the first step in healing, and I talked about acceptance. So I did this video in 2014, I believe, and I talked about acceptance. So acceptance in the therapeutic aspect of what I'm talking about is not really the same as kind of the spiritual idea or religious idea. In fact, it's kind of quite different. So it's not at all, and I know that some people have kind of taken it this way, it is not a matter of resigning yourself to the fact that something happened and you just move on from it. Kind of like, well, okay, this happened and I just have to accept it and then move on. That's actually quite different, almost the opposite of what I mean when I talk about acceptance. So I wanted to explore that a little bit more. It is not at all about just saying, well, this happened to me and therefore I just need to accept it so that I can heal and move on with my life. What acceptance means from my perspective in this therapeutic type of realm, healing realm, is an acceptance in facing the reality of what it means that you've experienced it. So there are two parts to that, and one is really just an acknowledgement of the truth, because denial is such a powerful way that we cope with difficult things as children, as also as adults. So when we are in denial about the reality of something, so not just the reality that something happened, that might be a part of it, it's the reality that this thing happened and it has an impact on me. Actually, this is what we're talking about right now in returning to wholeness. The acceptance that this thing happened, and this thing could be childhood trauma, it could be a medical diagnosis, death of somebody that you care about. In fact, acceptance is a part of the grieving process. But again, it's not a resigning yourself to it and, okay, this happened, it sucks, and now I just move on. It is an acknowledgement, an honoring of that reality. So with childhood trauma or childhood wounding, what that might look like is, yeah, okay, this happened and that hurts. This happened and it really has affected me. This happened and it's affected so many areas of my life and it really pisses me off. There are so many different ways that we can acknowledge and accept that reality. Again, it's not a resigning yourself to it and then you just, okay, I've done that and now I move on. That's the first step. Being able to really recognize that, because a lot of people will say, yeah, this happened, but it was a long time ago. That's not true acceptance. Or, yeah, that happened, but all these other great things happened too. That's not acceptance. That's a form of denial. It's minimizing, it's avoiding. So accepting that means acknowledging the truth that it happened, and then acknowledging, accepting how it feels to you, what it has meant to you. Because those examples that I just gave are an acknowledgement that it happened, but a complete lack of acceptance of what it actually means that it happened. And if we don't do that, if we bypass that, then we are not able to actually heal that wound, because we're not seeing it as something that needs to be healed. Like if you have a medical condition or an injury, you can't just look at that and say, oh, yeah, that happened, but look, the rest of me is perfectly fine, so I can just ignore this. Or it's not really that bad, so I just ignore it. No, you still have to pay attention to it, right? Whether you need stitches, whether you need an antibiotic, or maybe you just need to put your foot up, like you sprained your ankle. You need to tend to it, right? You have to acknowledge that that thing needs attention in order for it to heal. So this is true whether we're talking about emotional wounding or a physical wound or a medical issue. If we just push it aside, then we don't get to heal it. If you're given a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis of something, and you just pretend that it's not, or try to say, well, it's not that big of a deal, it could be a lot worse, well, it's likely going to get worse. And that's what happens with emotional wounding too. When we try to push it away and bury it, that energy is still there. That wound is still there, getting worse over time. And we feel it, we experience it, but we don't connect the dots to it. So therefore, we just push through. We try to fix it in other ways, to treat the symptom and not the cause. And another way this shows up so often is, how often have you struggled in some way, kind of physically or medically, where maybe something is in pain, but you just kind of push it aside. Oh, well, that's not anything significant. Well, it's not that bad. So you just try to go on and pretend it's not there. Thinking about my own experience a few years ago. You just kind of ignore it. Like you recognize that it's there, especially when the pain is really bad, but then the pain kind of subsides a little bit, either because the pain naturally subsides or because you distract yourself in other ways. So you get to avoid it. But eventually it keeps coming back. And for me, not paying attention to that, not taking it seriously, not noticing what else could be going on other than this little pain that happened, sometimes relatively intense pain, but it was relatively short-lived. And what ended up happening is I was in the hospital for a week on IV fluids, not able to eat anything because I developed pancreatitis. That wasn't pleasant. And if I had paid attention to it, if I had honored what was happening inside my body, that pain was real, that maybe there was something bigger going on, it probably wouldn't have ended up in pancreatitis and in the hospital for a week and ultimately surgery. But when we do that emotionally, it's a lot more subjective, right? When we do that emotionally, when we're not really honoring what that is, then when we push it aside, That energy is still there, but we go on. And what often ends up happening is that we end up feeling shame because it's still creating struggle in some way. And again, what we do is treat the symptoms. We read the books, we take the courses, we do the tapping to try to treat the symptoms. But until we can really recognize and acknowledge what is creating the symptom, then we don't have the opportunity to heal it. And what I mean by honoring it doesn't mean we're putting it up on a pedestal and blaming everything on that, and therefore we have no responsibility. Absolutely not. And I know for most of you, probably all of you watching this, if you're watching this, then that is not likely how you would experience that. That's not how you would approach it. Honoring it is a willingness. Thinking about it as, particularly for childhood wounding, thinking of it as seeing a child who has experienced something that was hurtful, physically or emotionally. It could be something really significant like trauma, or it could be something that we would see as a normal type of experience, but still felt hurtful to that child. And imagining seeing that child sitting there hurting, feeling confused, feeling uncertain, having their sense of safety, emotional or physical, rocked. Not being sure that they can trust themselves or other people. How would you approach that child? Would you tell her or him it's not a big deal? That there are so many other things to be grateful for or to be happy about? So just don't pay attention to that. Just focus on these other things. Well, my guess is, again, if you're watching this, I can feel pretty confident in this. But my hope, too, is that absolutely not. That isn't what you would do. You would talk to that child. You would kneel down with that child, look him or her in the eyes, and tell her that it wasn't her fault. Tell him that it's okay to feel hurt, to feel sad. Maybe you would even grab that child and give her a big hug. That is what I mean by honoring, acknowledging, validating that it's real. So acceptance as the first step in healing is no longer being in denial. It's no longer trying to bypass and push it aside. It's an honoring of that truth. Because in honoring that truth, in that validation, healing begins to happen. When you push it aside, you actually create more wounding. Going back to thinking about that child. If an adult, particularly a trusted adult, tells that child, it's not a big deal, get over it, that's actually going to create more wounding for that child. It's going to create more mistrust within that child about themselves and what they're feeling and the people around them. Acceptance is not resigning yourself to something and moving on. Acceptance is honoring. It's validating. It's creating an opportunity to be seen and to heal. Without that, you do not choose to heal. You do not choose what is necessary for healing, because you're telling yourself, this isn't really a big deal. And you ultimately end up feeling often a lot of shame, or even feeling weak, that you struggle, but you've told yourself there's no reason for you to struggle. So I hope that that helps in understanding, from my perspective, what acceptance really means. And also in understanding what is necessary in that beginning stage of healing. And it's not just in the beginning stage. We actually have to go back to acceptance in that way. We have to make sure that we're not moving back into denial, avoidance, or minimizing as we go forward in the journey. So thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so and click the little bell for notifications. I'd love for you to share your comments and experiences below. And if you like this video, if you found it helpful, give it a thumbs up so that other people can also be more likely to see it. Thanks for joining me, and I'll look forward to connecting with you soon.